Before you roll out SharePoint to users, you need to complete the following tasks. Verify the client software that's installed. Change client settings to enable automatic logon. Set up security groups and permission levels. Apply branding. Set up security groups and permissions. And create the initial department sites that will be consumed by the business. Verifying client software. You should list client software requirements as part of your project plan. You want to determine who's using Office 2007 versus Office 2010 because that's going to change their experience with SharePoint. Office editions. There are different Office editions that provide different SharePoint feature sets. You want to make sure that everybody within your business is getting the same user experience. It's much more difficult to support an environment with mixed versions and editions. Not only are the how-to instructions different for each version, but SharePoint features that are present in one Office edition are often missing in another. These problems are magnified by the collaborative nature of SharePoint. You want to avoid mixed environments. It's much more difficult to support an environment with mixed versions and editions. Not only are the how-to instructions different for each version, but SharePoint features that are present in one Office edition are often missing in another. These problems are magnified by the collaborative nature of SharePoint. Files pass around much more freely, and instructions from one user to another won't make sense if they refer to two different versions of Office. Changing client settings. You'll want to enable automatic logon. SharePoint prompts for username and password when you open a site for the first time in Internet Explorer. IE caches your credentials so you won't be prompted again as long as you keep IE open. Once you close IE, the cache is cleared. The same thing happens with Word or Excel. If you open a document from SharePoint, the Office application will prompt for your username and password, and will then cache those credentials as long as the Office application is open. This is usually preset by your IT department and pushed out to all users. If it hasn't been, all these prompts can quickly become annoying. Ideally, users should only have to log on once to the network, and then the application should reuse their network credentials automatically without prompting. To solve that problem, add the domain for the SharePoint sites to the local intranet zone on client computers. Not only will you want to enable automatic logon, but you will also want to disable download warnings. Whenever you open an Office document from SharePoint, IE displays a warning. Some files can harm your computer. If the information looks suspicious or you do not fully trust the source, do not open the file. That warning is intended to prevent users from accidentally opening documents that contain viruses written as macros. Most learn to ignore the warning, but you can safely turn it off if your company allows that. You want to make sure that that's acceptable with the IT department. Office 2007 and 2010 default document formats, DOCX, XLSX, they omit the macros. So you can more safely trust those file types. If it's DOCM, XLSM, those are documents that do contain macros. So you do have some level of separation there when it comes to turning it off. You want to make sure not to turn it off for the ones designated as macros. Setting security. Setting security has two parts. Authentication verifies that a user is who he or she says she is or he is. Authorization determines the permissions that a user has. By default, authentication is verified by Active Directory. So users log on to SharePoint using the same username and password that they use to log on to the network. Authorization is then handled through the SharePoint settings. Via farm administration, those are global permissions. Do keep in mind that farm administrators do not have site collection permissions by default. However, they do have the permissions to manage the farm. Policy, web application. It can grant or deny access across all site collections in a web application. There are times when you use third-party tools that do need access to all site collections. This is where you would go in and apply the permissions for the service account that will need the access. Service administrators. The scope of that is service applications. It identifies who administers the specified service application, allows for administration of search, performance point, managed metadata, etc. Service to specify users without having to have the farm admin role. Site collection administrator. This is at the site collection scope. Identifies who controls the site collection, who has full permissions throughout the site collection, including all subsites. It also determines who should receive access requests and other site notifications from SharePoint. SharePoint groups. Those are within the site. Individual sites have specific groups associated with them. Whenever you create a site, there are groups that are created by default associated to that site. They set the permissions for groups of users. Inherited permissions. Inherits permissions from the parent. So whatever permissions are applied at the parent site will be applied at the child site, directly below it. Unique permissions. This is site, list, library, document. That's when the inheritance is broken. It stops inheriting permissions to further restrict access. You may have a specific list that you don't want everybody to have access to that has access to the site. So you would break the inheritance and apply the specific permissions to those items or lists. Using administrative accounts. The farm administrator, it controls the entire server farm. Web application policy accounts control individual web applications. Service administrators manage the service applications. Site collection owners administer individual site collections within a web application. For a small deployment, all 4 levels may use the same identity, but for larger deployments, it's important to divide the responsibility appropriately. You certainly don't want your service administrators or your search administrator to have access to the entire farm. Okay, let's go look at the administrative accounts available. Let's take a look at our first administrative group. That's the farm administrators. By default, SharePoint sets the farm administrators account to be the account you use when installing SharePoint. To be the account you used when installing SharePoint. So let's go take a peek at that. Open Central Administration, Start, Programs, SharePoint Products, Central Administration. Because this has to do with security, we're going to click on the security link in the Quick Launch. And the first link that we see is under Users Manage the Farm Administrators Group. By default, it automatically adds the Local Administrators Group. Whenever you're installing a farm, this is the first thing you're going to want to remove. In most companies, the built-in group has additional users in there that you may not want to have access to the farm. So the first thing we're going to do is select the checkbox to the left of Built-in Administrators. Click New. I'm sorry, not New. We're going to click Actions, Remove Users from Group. It's going to prompt you, you are about to remove the following members from the group. Click OK. And now we're left with our SharePoint administrator as our only farm admin. Let's add an additional administrator that will have access to administer the farm. Click New, Add Users, and we're going to add Intranet Admin. Hit Enter or click the Check Names button to resolve it. You can choose to send a welcome email to the new users. We're going to deselect this and click OK. And now we've just added another member to our group. And remember, these users have full access to central administration to administer the farm. Again, they do not have access to the site collections by default. That will have to manually be done. And the easiest way to do that, if your administrator needs to have full access to everything, including the site collections, then you might make it a policy that anytime a new web app is created, you're going to add the users to the web policy for that web application. So let's go back to application management. We're finished with the farm administrators. We've removed somebody. We've added another one, so we have 2 administrators now. Click on application management. Let's go back to security. We were right where we needed to be. Specify web application user policy. Click on specify web application user policy, and you'll see that by default the search crawling account has full read access to everything within this web application. That's how it's able to go out and index the content of the different files that are uploaded into SharePoint. If it doesn't have full read, it can't do that. And you certainly could go through each and every site collection. You could have 200 site collections in one web application and add this account individually, but why when you can come up here and do it at the top level, at the web application level, and then it'll propagate down. So let's add users. We want to give our farm administrator full access to everything within this web application. We're going to choose all zones. We only have one zone right now. If we had more, it would apply to all the zones, or we could do it individually per zone. Click Next. Again, I cannot emphasize, make sure that you're in the right web application. If you're not, you'll want to change that. And let's go ahead and do that. Just so we're going to go back one step. And under Web Application, let's click Change Web Application. We only have one, but odds are you're going to have multiple here. You would choose the correct one, and then it would be filled here. This location would represent that. Tell it Next. We're going to add Intranet, Admin, and Administrator. Give it full control. We can choose Deny Right, has no right access, Deny All Access. If we have a certain group that we do not want to have access to this web application, we could certainly deny it here. What that does is it keeps users from adding somebody or a group to the site to give them access. This would override that. Now, if this were a system account, if this were, for instance, you may have SCA monitoring your servers. If that's the case, there's a service account associated that does need read access across the board to everything within the farm. So you would come into Web Policy, put in the account, give it full control, but you would want to tell it to operate as a system account. It will not be recorded in the user information unless the account is directly added to the permissions of the site. So if you're running any reports for user access, this account will not show up and skew the results. Go ahead and click Finish. And now you'll see we have 2 accounts with full control and 2 accounts with read. Anytime you're using a third-party tool to work with SharePoint, if it requires full access across the board, this is the location that you're going to apply it. It's going to save you a lot of time. Okay, let's move on to Service Application Administrators. To give a user permissions to a specific service application that does allow individual management, you'll need to go to the Service Application page. And you do that, let me go back to make sure everybody sees that okay. Here you're going to click on Application Management from Central Administration, Manage Service Applications, and it will list all the different service applications that are enabled on the farm. If I want to allow somebody to manage the usage and health data, because if you have a very large environment, you'll have different individuals managing different components. You'll highlight it. Don't click the link, but highlight to the right of it, and it'll highlight the entire line there. Click Administrators on the ribbon at the top. Here we're going to add the person that's going to be our usage administrator. It's going to be Joan Hansen. And we're going to have somebody else. There's 2 people. It'll be Ed Wilson. Press Enter to resolve the names and then click Add. It must show up in the second box. If it doesn't, a lot of times you'll click it in here, resolve it, and then click OK and think that you've given the permissions, but that's not the case. You have to click Add to propagate the box below it, and then select each individual person, and then apply full control in the permissions for that person dialog box below. Same for Ed Wilson. And you'll see they both have full control. We'll click OK to apply the changes. Let's say that Ed Wilson is no longer in that role. He's changed. He's working in another department with a completely different role. So to remove somebody, we simply click Administrators, highlight the person that we want to remove, and click the Remove button. Then click OK. And you will see that Ed no longer has permissions to manage that service application. And then finally, we have this Site Collection Administrator. When you create a site collection, by default, you have to put a primary site collection administrator. Again, highly recommend a secondary. You should always have backup. And that account, or that may not necessarily have to be a specific user. It could be an account that's got an email box associated with it that a group monitors. So let's go to Application Management to look at who it is that's a site collection administrator. Maybe somebody has left the company and they're no longer the secondary site collection administrator. This is where you would come in to make that change. For instance, we have SharePoint Administrator and Intranet Administrator. We're going to change Intranet Admin to be Joan. Joan's a busy girl. She is now our secondary site collection administrator. So she has full permissions across all sites within that collection. There could be 200 sites in that site collection, and she will have full control over that and full rights. Now, you can assign additional site collection administrators. From this window, you can change, but you can only add one per box. You can only have one primary, one secondary associated in Central Admin. However, if you go directly to the site, you can assign additional site collection administrators besides the primary and secondary. So let's go ahead and do that. Under Site Actions in the upper left corner, click the drop-down and go to Site Settings. If I click Site Permissions, it does not bring me to Site Collection Administrators from here. I can click on it from here and get to it. And you'll notice it automatically put the secondary and the primary. And then I would go ahead and add anybody else that is what would be considered a site collection administrator. And then click OK. You can also access it from Site Settings. And as long as you're at the root of the site, if you're in a sub-site further down within the site, you won't see this. You have to be at the root, the top level of that site collection. Not of the web app, but of that particular site collection.